What's up, guys? I'm Chad Barnes, and welcome to the channel. Here, it's all about real car talk, from simple fixes to smart driving tips and keeping your ride in top shape. If that sounds good to you, go ahead and give the video a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button and make sure you watch all the way through. There's a lot of good stuff coming. Let's get to it.
Xray can really be considered the most modern model of AvtoVAZ. The car of Bo Anderson's era entered the assembly line a few months later than Vesta, at the very end of 2015. But if Vesta in today's conditions, the key development and the main hope of the plant, the Xray, having lasted on the assembly line for a little more than 6 years, ignominiously retired. For those who followed the development and fate of the model, its end was predictable. Well, and for those who were not interested in this car, we will remind why the whole career of Lada Xray was an almanac of disappointments. In fact, literally everything failed. Let's list what exactly. Image and appearance. Recently, the Xray concept, actually, the prototype that gave birth to the idea of the crossover and its name, celebrated its 10th anniversary. Everyone remembers it for sure: squat off-road 3-door with dashingly piled rear pillars and expressive diode optics collected. A lot of positive feedback from the public. Inspired by the idea, AvtoVAZ started its practical realization. The transition from prototype to reality was abrupt. Of course, no one was expecting a miracle, because the concept demonstrated future design solutions and plans for style development. However, the Xray Concept 2, which appeared in 2014, was still radically different. The transition from a 3-door body to a 5-door body was absolutely logical, but there was no trace of the former squatness. And the crossover styling had dissolved. In fact, the second iteration turned out to be a tall 5-door hatchback, which, however, still retained a share of the original style. And though Xray Concept 2 was already much less daring, the serial Xray turned out to be even simpler, from dashes of rear optics remained curmudgeonly commas, diode stuffing of headlights and lights also disappeared, and even large wheels gave place to 15-inch shoes. Practical, but achieving the integrity of the image. In fact, the only thing that related the conveyor car with the initial concept, which formed the primary customer audience, was X-shaped motifs in the design of the front and sides. The final chord in the destruction of the model's image was its positioning. The appearance of the production Xray and the first Xray concept is a literal visualization of the internet meme "You and that guy she told you not to worry about." But the resulting hatchback was labeled crossover and sent to conquer the market in competition with front-wheel drive versions of Hyundai Creta and similar. For a full understanding of the situation, recall that the co-platform source Renault Sandero Stepway the French honestly called a hatchback, despite the presence of unpainted plastic Dodger, which the Xray appeared only in 2018. Technique to say that no effort was made over the technical part of the Xray would be a crime against the truth. The team led by Oleg Grunenkov laid out both before the launch of the model and during its entire assembly line life. In fact, the whole period of the Xray's production was a series of constant revisions. In 2016, immediately after the launch of the model, the plant immediately received a portion of constructive criticism from the press and buyers. The wheels, they say, are small, the engine is weak, and the non-disable stabilization system finally deprives the front-wheel drive crossover of chances on light off-road. In addition, it was necessary to increase the degree of localization and work on the price. As a result, the H4M HR16DE motor, which was poorly localized at that time, was simply abandoned a few months after the debut of the Xray. It not only complicated production, but was also economically unprofitable. Following the French motor, the French gearbox also left. Mechanics Junior 5 for the base 1.6-liter engine was abandoned in favor of its own automatic transmission with the index 21809. However, not everywhere the refinement went the way of cutting the unnecessary. At the end of 2016, another motor appeared, 1.8-liter 21179 of own development, which in the first years also threw up problems. The main defect was high oil consumption, which had to be promptly eliminated. In addition, in 2016 on the Xray introduced a button to disable escape, which was so requested by buyers and journalists. But their list of wishes did not end there. In addition to the button, they asked to add 30 to 40 mm of knee space in the back row, too. introduce a steering wheel reach adjustment and lumbar support of the driver's seat. It wasn't until 2018 that the seat was moved backward when the Cross version with a simple name X-Ray Cross. It received a lot of improvements, among the key ones are rear disc brakes, EPS instead of electro-hydraulic booster, extended track, different wheel drives, new seats, rear sofa moved back by 25mm and ride select system with off-road modes. For 2019, another tech update is coming up. Variator the JF015E unit was combined with the same H4M motor, which was abandoned in 2019. It was now deeply localized and did not complicate production. Needless to say, only the major refinements are listed above. Work on introducing new options and juggling the kits was continuous. It seems that the factory put maximum effort into finalizing the model, so what else could the X-Ray buyer want? In fact, the car, which from the very beginning was dubbed a crossover, was expected to have competitive advantages over the original Sandero. And they, suddenly, did not turn out to be. First, Sandero Stepway was offered with hydro-mechanical automatic, all French, DP0, it AL4. And the two-pedal version of X-Ray, firstly, did not appear at once, and secondly, was seriously inferior to the French one in the eyes of the buyer. After all, for the domestic model offered robotized transmission AMT, which did not attract buyers with its algorithms of work, and besides poorly suited to crossover operation. It was the dissatisfaction of the public that led to the fact that Togliatti began to look for alternatives and introduce a variator on the X-Ray. It took another 3 years, during which the model finally lost the potential audience that could pay attention to it. Secondly, the dreams of many people, both buyers and critics and fantasists, were connected with all-wheel drive. Partly these people can be understood. After all, the X-Ray was dragged by the ears into the crossover segment, and there are 1.8 liter engine and front-wheel drive will not surprise anyone. Avtovaz even seriously considered the possibility of introducing a clutch. The good thing is that the concern had ready-made technical solutions. Moreover, the layout possibility of full drive realization on X-Ray was proved successfully. Another thing did not come together: economy. The model was not cheap as it was, and the introduction of all-wheel drive brought its price tag to another level. And without a clutch it remained an ordinary hatchback with a claim to crossover ambitions. It should be understood that those who wrote on the internet about the need for all-wheel drive on the X-Ray and those who actually bought these cars are different people. But the absence of a clutch and automatic transmission really weakened the image of the model as a crossover, which it originally was not. Of the smaller technical shortcomings not eliminated, we can note the lack of a 6-speed manual transmission. 5-speed mechanics was not ideal, especially when paired with a 1.8-liter engine. However, the introduction of the French 6-speed TL4 would also mean an impermissible increase in cost. And everything was not smooth with it. Price. Another stumbling block for the X-Ray was the price. At the start of sales for X-Ray was asked from 600,000 rubles, and the top versions were in 750,000, that is, the hatchback. Sorry, crossover was more expensive than Vesta. But here it is more appropriate to start not from it, but from the source in the person of Renault Sandero Stepway. On average, X-Ray was slightly cheaper than the Frenchman. In comparable configurations the difference was about 50,000 rubles. But the relatively low level of localization did not allow flexible management of price lists. And the appearance of the Cross version finally nullified the price differences, equalized by the volume of unpainted plastic. X-Ray was equalized in cost with the French Cross hatchback. Vazovs tried to keep the base price tag at the level of 600,000, including by simplifying the equipment. For example, in 2019 there was a new version of Standard with unpainted door handles on 15-inch stamped wheels. But in 2020, the most expensive X-Ray in the new version Instinct broke through the mark in 1 million rubles. At the beginning of this year, for a hatchback without plastic, Dodger asked already 1.1 to 1.3 million rubles, and the Cross version cost from 1.25 to 1.6 million rubles. Sales. This whole mess of inconsistencies can be clearly seen in the X-Ray sales volumes. Yes, this model was not conceived as a bestseller, capable of shutting up Vesta, but it was definitely supposed to keep company with the larger, and, in some places, even more expensive Lagos. However, things didn't go so briskly from the start. The debut year for the X-Ray was 2016. In January-February, it did not reach the top 25 best-selling models in Russia, and only by March it climbed to the 23rd line with an indicator of 1,500 sold copies. In April, it occupied the 13th line with the indicator of 2,200 sold cars, but in May the demand dropped again to 1,600 copies, and further during the year amounted to less than 2,000. For comparison, even if we omit the cheaper Granta, which sold 7,000 to 8,000 monthly, we can look at Vesta's figures with its 5,000 to 6,000 per month. Total sales of the first year for Xray amounted to incomplete 20,000 cars, 10,000 less than Lagos and half as much as 55,000 for Vesta. That is, already in the first year the car turned out to be much less popular than it could be assumed. Things seemed to get better from there. In March 2017, the Xray entered the top 10 best-selling models, reaching 3,000 cars per month for the first time. But in a growing market, this was still 2.5 to 3 times lower than Vesta's figures. At the end of the year, 33,000 cars were sold. The Xray was able to catch up with the Lagos, but hopelessly lagged behind the Vesta with its 77,000 cars sold. In 2018, in a moderately growing market, Xray managed to stay in the top 10 with 35,000 cars against 44,000 for Lagos and 108 for Vesta. But in 2019, the market shrank slightly and Xray felt it strongly, a drop to 17th place in the top 25 best-selling models and a drop in sales to 29,000 units, although Lagos maintained last year's figure of 43,000 and Vesta increased volumes to 111,000 units. And after all, in 2019, as we remember, the Xray received a lot of updates and refinements and cross-version and variator. In COVID 2020, the first rumors about AvtoVAZ's possible abandonment of the Xray appeared. The rumors did not come true, but there was ground beneath them. The market shrank by 9%, and Xray sales collapsed by a third at once. To 19,000 cars, that is, average monthly sales fell from 2.5 to 3 to 1.5 thousand. At that time, the Xray barely broke into the top 25 in sales, taking 24th place. To understand the scale of the problem, it is worth clarifying that Lagos in the same year 2020 sagged from 43 to 37,000 and Vesta lost quite a bit, 107,000 against 111. The next, 2021, was a year of growth when the market added 4%. Xray also grew, and by 15% to 22,000 cars, rose to 18th place in the top 25, but it was still far away from Lagos with incomplete 40,000 and Vesta with 114,000. In the current year Xray continued to lose audience. In January-February 1 and 1.2 thousand cars were sold respectively. There is no sense to follow the volumes further. It is a monthly sale of residuals of 250 to 400 cars per month. But even here you can still see the difference in the stock of cars. Vesta, which also temporarily left the assembly line, has been sold since spring by 1.5 to 2,000 cars per month. Conclusion: Lada Xray was not an outright bad car. It, as in the song by the band King and Shoot, became a slave of other people's ideas. As the only child of unrealized parents, they tried to put everything into it at once. A compact hatchback with a low level of localization, which could not cost cheaper than the related Sandero on the platform B0, was given to the wrong class, overestimating the requirements of buyers and not providing it with competitive advantages, and at the same time deprived of the original strengths like appearance. In harsh market conditions, it promised a hard life for the model, which ended by a fortunate coincidence. After all, the Xray's departure is unlikely to be regretted by anyone except the factory team that invested efforts in its creation and refinement. In conclusion, the Lada Xray's demise marks the end of a chapter that many will not mourn. Despite its initial promise, the vehicle struggled to find its place in a competitive market, facing criticism for its design and performance. As consumer preferences evolved, the Xray failed to adapt, leading to its eventual discontinuation. While some may have hoped for its success, the reality is that the automotive landscape has moved on, and the Lada Xray simply could not keep pace. Its farewell serves as a reminder of the importance of innovation and responsiveness in the ever-changing world of automobiles.